Aaron Ryder sat alone in the dim glow of his dual monitors long after the office had emptied for the night. As a senior automotive engineer at Orion Automotive, he often volunteered for late-night tech fixes. Enterprise resource planning, ERP, glitches didn't usually fall under his job description, but Aaron's expertise with the company's internal systems made him the go-to troubleshooter. That evening, he was digging through system logs to diagnose a misrouted notification in the ERP, a routine task, or so he thought. The building was silent, except for the humming HVAC and the occasional creak of cooling metal. Aaron's fingers flew over the keyboard, eyes scanning lines of code and database entries. Finally, he found the culprit, a minor email integration bug. A company announcement about supplier lead times had been erroneously forwarded to an archive mailbox. As he traced the digital trail to ensure nothing else was awry, a familiar name unexpectedly popped up in the log. Julia Ryder, his wife. Aaron frowned, momentarily thinking fatigue was making him see things. Why would Julia's name appear in Orion's internal system logs? She didn't work for Orion. Perhaps it was a coincidence. Someone else named Julia? But the email address attached was unmistakably hers, one he knew well from their personal correspondence. Heart-thumping, Aaron drilled down into the logs, following the thread like a trail of gunpowder. The ERP's email module had recorded an outgoing message from an Orion employee's account to Julia's personal Gmail. It appeared as part of an automated forward rule, likely triggered by the earlier glitch. His pulse quickened. It could be innocent. Maybe a friend at Orion had emailed Julia about something. But at 11 p.m.? Unlikely. With a few keystrokes, Aaron accessed the archived message. He hesitated. A cold prickle of dread crawled up his spine. Should I be doing this? He wondered, a sense of impending doom making his mouth go dry. But the need to know overwhelmed any abstract ethical qualms. He opened the email. Immediately, his eyes were assaulted by a block of text that made his stomach twist. Last night was incredible. I keep replaying every moment of you in my arms. I can still taste you, Julia. I can't wait until next time. I'll book the same hotel near the office. Friday at 8. Does your busy engineer husband suspect anything? Probably not. He's always so absorbed in his work that he'd never notice what his wife really needs. Aaron stopped reading. The chair squeaked as he jerked back as if the words had scalded him. What the hell? He whispered into the empty office. For a moment, he hoped he was misunderstanding, perhaps a spam or a cruel joke. But the sender's name was right there, Mark Bennett. Aaron knew that name. Mark was a vice president at Apex Dynamics, Orion's biggest rival in the automotive supply sector. In fact, Aaron had met Mark briefly at an industry conference a year ago. At the time, Mark had been all firm handshakes and corporate smiles, just another polished executive. Now, that same man's email dripped with intimate detail and a sneering reference to your busy engineer husband. A wave of nausea rolled through Aaron as reality set in. Julia, his Julia, partner of 10 years, the woman he thought he knew inside and out, was having an affair. And not just with anyone, but with an executive from a rival firm. The betrayal hit him from two angles at once, personal and professional, like a 1-2 punch he never saw coming. Aaron realized he had stopped breathing. He forced himself to inhale slowly. His hands trembled on the keyboard. Was this real? It felt like stumbling over a live wire in the dark. He reread the lines, each word a dagger. Taste you, in my arms Friday at 8. They had a rendezvous planned. And that dig about him being an oblivious engineer. Mark's smug little winky face practically leered at him from the screen. Anger and humiliation formed a bitter knot in Aaron's throat. He could picture it now. Julia lying to his face, slipping off on the pretense of meeting a friend or working late, while this man, this Mark, had his hands all over her. Aaron's mind flashed back to the past few months. Julia's growing detachment, The guarded phone calls, her newfound habit of staying up late texting, and then claiming it was just a work buddy from her volunteer committee. All the little signs he'd rationalized away came rushing back with cruel clarity. You fool, he berated himself. It was right under your nose. He stood abruptly, paced the length of the empty office to dispel the adrenaline surging through him. One hand raked through his dark hair. The pain was sharp and immediate, a mix of heartbreak and rage. But beneath it, something else flickered. A steely, gathering resolve. Aaron was not by nature an impulsive man. Years of engineering taught him the value of methodical thinking even in crisis. And this was the crisis of his life. He needed to stay calm. At first, images of confronting them physically swarmed his imagination. He envisioned storming into that hotel on Friday, catching them in the act, the look on Julia's face, on Mark's face. He imagined swinging a fist into the smug executive's jaw, imagined Julia screaming, the ensuing chaos. The thought was momentarily satisfying in his visceral anger. But then what? A fight? Police? Scandal? It would be a brief catharsis with lasting consequences, and ultimately it wouldn't heal anything. Mark Bennett might even enjoy seeing Aaron reduced to a brute. And Julia? She had already broken his heart. He wouldn't give her the satisfaction of seeing him utterly shatter. No, not like that, Aaron thought, inhaling deeply until the initial urge for violence ebbed. He returned to his chair and carefully saved a copy of the incriminating email thread, forwarding it to a secure personal folder that only he could access. If nothing else, he needed to preserve evidence, his logical mind taking inventory even as his world crashed down. This was more than a domestic betrayal. The man involved made it a high-stakes game. Mark was in the same industry, a direct competitor in many ways. The affair wasn't just personal if handled correctly, or incorrectly. It could spill into the professional realm. And that gave Aaron an idea, faintly forming through the haze of emotion. There might be a way to exact revenge that went far beyond a heated confrontation. But first things first, he had to get through this night. Aaron shut down the diagnostic programs and locked his computer. In the silent reflection of the dark monitor, he barely recognized himself. Jaw clenched, eyes burning not with tears, not yet, but with a cold fire. His marriage, his family life, 10 years of trust. All of it now sat on a knife's edge. Julia's betrayal had quietly loaded a bullet into a chamber, and tonight he'd pulled the trigger on truth. The shot had rung out in his heart, but no one else knew a thing. Not Julia, peacefully at home. She thought he was just working late as usual, and certainly not Mark Bennett. Aaron intended to keep it that way, at least for now. If he wanted justice or revenge, he would have to move carefully and quietly. Wiping any sign of distress from his face, Aaron grabbed his jacket and made his way out of the office. Each step echoed in the corridor. He felt strangely detached, as if watching himself from afar. As he exited Orion's headquarters into the crisp night air, he looked up at the stars scattered above the parking lot. It struck him that they looked especially cold tonight. He unlocked his car and slid into the driver's seat, hands gripping the wheel as he sat in silence for a long moment. A dull ache throbbed in his chest, but beneath it, the first threads of a plan were weaving together. They think I'm too busy to notice, he mused, recalling Mark's derisive comment. They think I'm just a naive, workaholic engineer. Aaron's eyes narrowed. In that moment, he made a promise to himself. He would not confront Julia or Mark, not until he was ready. No screaming, no drama, no warnings. Instead, he would use the very things that Mark mocked, Aaron's diligence, brains, and industry know-how, as his weapons. Starting now, Aaron Ryder would play the long game. He would make them pay for every lie and every stolen kiss, and he would do it with such precision that they'd never see it coming until it was too late. Gathering intel back at home, Aaron pretended to be none the wiser. It was the hardest act he'd ever put on. That night, he slipped into bed next to Julia, who murmured half asleep, You worked so late, hun? Everything okay? His throat tightened at the sound of her voice, a voice he had loved, now a siren song of deception. But he forced a yawn and a smile she couldn't see in the dark. Mm-hmm, he lied gently. Just the usual database gremlins. All fixed now. Go back to sleep. She simply hummed and nestled into her pillow. In minutes, Julia was breathing the slow, deep rhythm of sleep. Aaron lay awake on his back, staring at the ceiling and wondering how many times she'd fallen asleep beside him after being with him. Mark. He wondered if she was dreaming of that smug bastard right now while he, her husband, lay seething mere inches away. The thought was almost unbearable. Aaron's jaw clenched so hard it hurt, but he kept his composure. He had to. The next day, and the day after, Aaron played the role of the oblivious husband to perfection. He still kissed Julia goodbye in the morning, still texted her at lunch to ask how her day was going. The only sign that something was off was within him. Every message from her, every glance at her phone, pricked him with pain. But outwardly, he gave her nothing to suspect. If anything, he was more attentive than usual, fueled by a morbid need to see how far her deceit would go. And Julia performed her part expertly as well, prattling about mundane things, smiling as if nothing were wrong. By Wednesday evening, with date night approaching, Julia casually mentioned she'd be out Friday. "Remember I told you about my friend Melissa's engagement party?" she said over dinner, not quite meeting Aaron's eyes as she swirled spaghetti on her fork. "It's this Friday evening. I might be home late, don't wait up." Aaron's heart pounded with disgust at her smooth delivery. Melissa? There was no engagement party. Melissa was just a cover, one of the go-to names Julia had started using lately. He could have called her out right then with what he knew, watched her face drain of color. But he didn't. He only nodded and offered a pleasant, "Sure, tell Mel I said congrats." Inside, he felt a fresh stab of betrayal. Even now, given a chance to come clean or show a hint of guilt, Julia doubled down on her lies. It steeled his resolve further. Late that night, when Julia was sound asleep, Aaron slipped out of bed and into his home office down the hall. He shut the door softly, then powered on his personal laptop. It was time to delve deeper into Mark Bennett. If he was going to strike back, he needed information, not just about the affair, but about Mark's professional world. Mark was a VP at Apex Dynamics. Aaron knew that much from industry buzz. Apex and Orion competed fiercely in supplying advanced gearboxes to major car manufacturers. Aaron's work at Orion focused on the new X90 transmission, while Apex's flagship was their MK6 gearbox line, a product often touted as a cutting-edge competitor. The two companies were often neck and neck for contracts. Aaron recalled something from a few weeks back. One evening, he'd picked up Julia from what she said was a late work dinner. In hindsight, it was likely a rendezvous with Mark. On the drive home, she'd mentioned an anecdote, perhaps to fill silence or deflect suspicion, about a conversation she overheard. "My friend at Apex said they're having some embargo problems," Julia had said casually. Something about a Middle Eastern supplier and a U.S. manufacturer's restrictions. Sounds complicated. At the time, Aaron had only half listened, his mind on a design issue at work. He'd grunted and the topic faded. Now that comment blazed bright in his memory. Embargo problems. Middle Eastern supplier. U.S. manufacturer's restrictions. Could it be a clue? Was it possible that in the midst of her cheating, Julia had unwittingly handed him a weapon? Aaron leaned forward, typing search terms into his laptop. Apex Dynamic Supplier Embargo Middle East. He sifted through news articles and trade forums, looking for any whisper of Apex having supply chain troubles. Within minutes, he pieced together a plausible scenario. Apex's MK6 gearbox incorporated a specialized valve produced by a small firm in the United Arab Emirates. That valve, in turn, contained a proprietary component originating from a U.S. manufacturer. Recently, U.S. export laws had tightened around certain tech exports to Middle Eastern countries, perhaps due to concerns about re-export to sanctioned nations. The U.S. manufacturer was reportedly wary of its products ending up in the wrong place and had issued cautionary advisories. Though details were scant, Aaron's gut told him this was the embargo problem Julia had mentioned. Perhaps Apex was worried that shipping gearboxes with that U.S.-made component to certain buyers could violate export regulations. If their legal team was spooked enough, they might be watching those shipments closely. Suddenly, an elegant strategy emerged in Aaron's mind. What if he could trick Apex into believing they were on the verge of a serious legal violation with their MK6 gearbox exports? Something so severe that they'd have to halt their production or shipments, at least temporarily, to avoid multi-million-dollar fines or even criminal charges. The more he thought about it, the more it made wicked sense. Mark had made a fool of him in his personal life. Aaron could hit him where it would hurt just as much, in his career. He imagined the scenario: Apex's assembly lines grinding to a standstill, urgent meetings, Mark scrambling to save face in front of his CEO and board. Meanwhile, Orion, Aaron's company, could swoop in to fill any supply gaps, scoring a win and making Mark look incompetent. It was a fitting form of revenge, not with fists or blunt confrontation, but with information and manipulation weapons Mark wouldn't anticipate from the busy engineer. But to pull it off, he'd need more than rumor. He needed to speak Apex's language, legalese, regulations, specifics that would scare them into compliance mode. Thankfully, those specifics were publicly available if one knew where to look. Aaron spent hours that night reading up on U.S. export control laws. Terms like ER, Export Administration Regulations, and OFAC sanctions floated across his screen. He learned that if a foreign product like Apex's gearbox contained above a certain percentage of U.S. origin controlled content, shipping it to certain sanctioned countries would require a license or else violate federal law. For most destinations, the threshold was 25% U.S. content, but for terrorist-supporting countries, the bar was much lower, only 10%. The penalties for breaking these rules were draconian, up to 20 years in prison and $1 million in fines per violation for willful infractions. Even inadvertent mistakes could lead to asset seizures and massive civil fines. Aaron's eyes gleamed as he digested this. It was exactly the kind of nightmare any prudent supply chain manager would avoid at all costs. If he could make them think their MK6 line was entangled in such a legal hazard, they would likely pause shipments immediately and sort it out later. No company would risk shipments being seized at a port or their executives facing jail time. Not if they even suspected a violation of export laws. He carefully crafted a plan: pose as a concerned expert or consultant, and slip Apex a false tip about a non-existent legal conflict, as he termed it in his notes. The tip had to be convincing and detailed enough to trigger alarm bells. He could, for example, warn them that their UAE-made valve in the MK6 contained U.S. technology exceeding the 10% threshold, and that new intelligence suggested those gearboxes were being re-exported to a sanctioned country through a distributor. Perhaps hint that U.S. regulators were already scrutinizing shipments in the region. The goal was to light a small fire under Apex's supply chain team, not a full blaze that would invite outside investigation. He didn't actually want the government involved, after all, just enough smoke to make them stop and double-check everything. But how to deliver this message? An anonymous tip might be ignored. It would be far more effective coming from someone with apparent credibility. Aaron considered his options. He could impersonate a government official, but that was too easily verifiable and possibly illegal. A safer approach would be to be a helpful compliance consultant who had come across some concerning information. Perhaps an independent legal advisor who does contract work in export compliance and heard something through the grapevine. To sell it, he needed some trappings of legitimacy: a professional-looking email domain, maybe some legal jargon, and ideally a name or reference that Apex folks might recognize or trust. Flipping through his mental Rolodex, Aaron remembered a law firm that both Orion and Apex had used for trade issues, McAllen and Tate. If he invented a consultant who used to work for that firm, it might add credibility. He smirked at the thought. Mark Bennett would never suspect the naive engineer of having such devious cunning. By Thursday, Aaron set his scheme into motion. Using a secure VPN connection to mask his traces, he registered a fresh email address on an encrypted email service under the alias David Holloway Trade Compliance Consultant. He even spent $50 to register a very basic website domain for Holloway Consulting LLC and cobbled together a single-page profile with language cribbed from real consulting sites. It looked amateur, but not fake at a glance, the sort of one-man operation that might exist. Next, Aaron composed an email to Apex Dynamics supply chain manager, a man named Glenn Porter. A bit of digging on LinkedIn had yielded that name. The email subject line read, "Urgent compliance inquiry, potential ear OFAC issue with MK6 shipments." His hands were steady as he typed, fueled by cold determination. In the email, David Holloway explained that he was a concerned consultant flagging a potential issue. "It has come to my attention through industry contacts that Apex Dynamics MK6 gearboxes incorporate the ZX12 valve from Al Sharouk Industrial in UAE, which in turn contains U.S. origin technology from Fairmont Company. Recent updates to U.S. export regulations and sanctions enforcement suggest that any product containing over 10% U.S. controlled content cannot be legally shipped to certain Middle Eastern countries without a license. I have reason to believe some of your MK6 shipments may be destined for or passing through such regions, possibly via distributors in Oman or Jordan. This creates a risk of unintentional violations. U.S. authorities have been aggressively enforcing these rules. Penalties can be severe, up to 20 years imprisonment, and $1 million in fines per violation. I strongly urge your team to review compliance on this matter immediately. If needed, I'm available to advise on mitigation and to help liaise with the Department of Commerce anonymously to clarify the situation." He read it over twice, a wicked grin slowly forming. It was a masterful blend of truth and lies. The components and percentages sounded plausible, the legal citations accurate, and the carrot of offering help made it seem like he wasn't simply an alarmist, but a potential ally. The mention of severe penalties added the right touch of fear. If he received such an email about Orion's products, he knew he'd be extremely worried. Satisfied, Aaron sent the email late Thursday night, timing it so that it would be one of the first things in Glenn Porter's inbox Friday morning. Now there was nothing to do but wait and let the corporate bureaucracy at Apex do the rest. He suspected that by mid-Friday, chaos would begin to unfold in their halls. Yet Friday would also bring another crucial operation, capturing proof of the affair on video. As much as the professional revenge would hurt Mark, and even Julia by collateral damage, Aaron wanted personal vindication. He wanted undeniable evidence to confront them with, and perhaps to destroy Mark's career for good when the time was right. The email he found was damning, but skeptics could claim it was out of context or fake. A video, however, would leave no room for denials. All week, Aaron had been preparing for this. Through Julia's messages, which he continued to secretly monitor by syncing her phone to an old tablet, a trick he implemented using her Apple ID after borrowing her phone briefly to install a tracking app under the guise of updating her software. He confirmed that the meetup at the hotel was indeed on for Friday at 8 p.m. They mentioned the name, the Regency Suites downtown, a business-class hotel conveniently near Apex's offices. It appears Mark preferred to keep their liaisons close to work. Aaron decided that rather than dramatically bursting in, he would get a recording in a more discreet manner. But how to film in a hotel room? That part was tricky, until luck handed him an alternative. On Thursday afternoon, Julia texted Mark that she might come by his office first for a drink before they headed to the hotel, since he'd still be wrapping up work at 7. Mark's reply: "Perfect. Office door will be locked. I'll pour us something to start the weekend." That was it. They planned to be in Mark's office after hours, likely alone. If Aaron could plant a camera there beforehand, he could catch them together without ever stepping foot in that hotel. That evening, under the guise of having to go to the plant for a test run, a cover story he had casually mentioned to Julia that morning, Aaron set out to infiltrate Apex Dynamics offices. He knew Apex's campus, a modern glass building in the industrial park across town, though he'd never been inside. Mark's office, he guessed, would be on the executive floor. He had to be extremely careful. Getting caught breaking into a rival company could ruin him. But he was banking on Apex's building being relatively empty at 6 or 7 p.m., and perhaps a bit lax on security for a familiar face. He didn't have an Apex keycard, obviously, but he did have something. Julia's lover had gifted her an Apex ID badge as a memento, or a joke, early in their affair, perhaps stolen from a lanyard print shop. It bore Mark's name and photo, but encoded with no real access, just a blank. Julia kept it in a shoebox with other keepsakes. Aaron had discovered it while searching for any physical evidence of the affair earlier in the week. At the time, it had nearly sent him into a rage, the audacity to flaunt his company badge in front of her. Now, that souvenir had a use. It looked authentic from a distance. With a navy sport coat and slacks, and the badge clipped to his belt, Aaron could pass for an Apex employee in a quick glance, perhaps long enough to slip inside behind someone. Friday, 6:15 p.m. As Apex's day shift employees were leaving, Aaron strolled toward the lobby, heart hammering, but face composed. He trailed a small group of chatting employees through the glass entrance as if he belonged, giving a polite nod to the security guard at the desk, who barely looked up. The guard's eyes caught the badge on Aaron's hip, and, seeing the Apex logo, returned to his phone. "I'm in." The building's open atrium was quiet, bathed in the orange glow of sunset through tall windows. Aaron walked briskly, as if on a mission, he was, heading to the elevators. He had memorized the directory earlier. Executive offices were on the 5th floor. Thankfully, the elevator required no keycard for general access. Soon he was stepping out into a hushed, carpeted hallway lined with closed office doors. Name plaques and polished steel adorned each. He found Mark Bennett, VP, Operations, on the corner office. Fittingly, it had a view of the downtown skyline, now tinted pink and gold. No one else was around. Still, Aaron's nerves jangled as he tried the door handle. Locked, of course. He knelt and slipped a small toolkit from his pocket, one he often used for fiddling with mechanical prototypes. With a tension wrench and pick, he began to work the lock. It was a standard commercial lock, nothing fancy. His hands were steady. A half-minute later, a soft click. Aaron gently opened the door and slid inside, closing it behind him. Mark's office was spacious and meticulously tidy, illuminated by the evening light. A glass coffee table with a crystal decanter, presumably the promised drink, a leather sofa where Aaron pushed away the mental image of what would happen there in an hour. There was also a large mahogany desk, shelves with awards and framed photos, Mark with a golf trophy, Mark shaking hands with some CEO. The man certainly loved himself. Working swiftly, Aaron retrieved a miniature camera from his pocket. It was a motion-activated micro DVR, tiny enough to hide an event or between books. He opted for the bookshelf by the sofa. It had a few decorative vases that could provide cover. He affixed the camera behind a dark ceramic vase at chest height, pointing toward the couch and part of the desk, ensuring a clear view of where the action was likely to take place. The device had no wireless signal, too risky to intercept here. It would simply record to internal memory. He set it to activate on movement and sound and double-checked its camouflage. Satisfied it was invisible unless one looked very closely, he stepped back. Evidence would soon record itself. He felt a grim satisfaction, imagining the lens capturing Mark and Julia in flagrante. It was a strange feeling, heartbreak twisted with vindictive anticipation. He would have what he needed to destroy Mark when the time came. And Julia. He couldn't think about what seeing that video would do to him personally, not now. He compartmentalized the pain by focusing on the plan. Aaron slipped out of the office, relocking it with a quiet snick of the latch. The whole operation had taken maybe 3 minutes. As he walked back to the elevator, he heard distant laughter, perhaps cleaning staff or late workers on another floor. He stayed calm, strolling out as casually as he came. The guard didn't even glance up this time as Aaron exited into the parking lot twilight. He breathed deeply once outside, adrenaline finally releasing. Phase 1 of revenge, underway. Phase 2, also in motion by way of his planted email. Phase 3, the coming fallout, would soon begin. By 8 p.m., Aaron sat in his car down the street from Apex's building, hidden in the shadow of an empty lot. He had debated whether to try retrieving the camera immediately after it recorded the affair or wait. If he returned too soon, he risked bumping into them. If he waited too long, someone else might discover it, though unlikely before Monday. He decided to retrieve it later tonight, after they left. He could use the cover of darkness and the fact that he still had Mark's lock tools to get back in. For now, he would bide his time. His phone buzzed, a text from Julia. At the party, having fun, don't wait up. Love you. Aaron's grip tightened on the phone. Love you. The gall of it made his blood boil. He forced himself to take a long, slow breath. He replied simply, glad to hear. Have a good time. It was surreal, sitting there alone in the dark, texting banal messages to his cheating wife while waiting to catch her in the act. The two parallel realities made his head spin, but he held himself together with the thought of the endgame. To distract himself, Aaron checked his other ongoing stratagem. By now, Apex's supply manager would have read the compliance warning. With a tablet in hand, he accessed a throwaway email account he'd set up to monitor any news or industry chatter. He also had a contact on Orion's sales team who sometimes spilled intel after a beer. So earlier that day, Aaron had casually asked if he'd heard anything about Apex lately. The contact mentioned something interesting. Heard a rumor Apex might be facing some shipment delay. One of my clients said their order of MK6 gearboxes got pushed back because of paperwork issues. Not sure what that's about. That was music to Aaron's ears. It meant his planted seed was already sprouting consequences. Likely Glenn Porter at Apex had indeed raised a red flag over the shipments. Apex's legal or compliance team must have ordered a pause until they verified the issue. He imagined the scene. Midday Friday, Mark Bennett getting an urgent call that shipments scheduled to depart the warehouse were being held. Perhaps he'd rush into a meeting where Glenn explained this disturbing tip. There'd be confusion, maybe panic. Mark, not fully understanding the technicalities, would nonetheless sense danger. Would he connect it to any foul play? Unlikely at first, this kind of snag wasn't unheard of in the industry. Export rules changed often, and big companies could get caught off guard. Mark might actually be cursing their luck right now, oblivious that luck had nothing to do with it. It was Aaron's hand on the lever. That mental image buoyed Aaron's spirits as the minutes ticked by. Eventually, around 9:30 p.m., a pair of car headlights swept out of the Apex parking garage. Aaron recognized the car even at distance, Mark's sleek black Audi. He'd seen it once before at the conference. Through his telephoto camera, another gadget he brought along just in case, he could make out two silhouettes in the front seats. Mark and Julia, presumably heading to the Regency for the rest of their tryst. Aaron's gut tightened seeing his wife in that car. Even knowing and planning everything, the pain was still raw. He wanted to be furious with her, and he was. But he shoved those feelings aside for later. Right now, she was part of the target. He had to think that way to stay focused. Once the Audi was well down the road, Aaron drove back to Apex's building. It was nearly 10 p.m. The place was dark, save for a few security lights. The front door was now locked, and the guard likely doing rounds or in a back office. Aaron chose a side entrance this time that he had noticed earlier, one with an electronic lock. Using a slim gym card he'd prepared, and a bit of luck that the latch plate had a known gap, he managed to pop the door. Inside again, silent halls. He quickly took the elevator up and returned to Mark's office door. No voices or sounds, naturally, since its occupants had left. He picked the lock once more and retrieved his camera from its hiding spot. The indicator showed it had recorded several clips. Perfect. Pocketing it, Aaron surveyed the office one last time to ensure everything was as it had been. His eyes fell on a framed photo on Mark's desk. It was one of Mark and Julia together at some charity gala, dressed to the nines, smiling radiantly. The frame was inscribed, "To new friendships, cheers," in a flowing script. So Mark had the audacity to keep a photo of them right on his desk? Aaron's fist tightened involuntarily. He nearly smashed the frame right then, but he stopped himself. Instead, he removed the back of the frame, took out the photo, and slid it into his pocket. In its place, he left a different photo he found in Mark's drawer, one of Mark alone. Reassembling the frame, he set it back. He set it. It now just showed Mark grinning by himself, arm around an empty space where Julia had been cropped out. A petty act, perhaps, but it made Aaron smirk. Let Mark puzzle over that later. Locking up behind him, Aaron made his exit without incident. By the time he got home close to midnight, Julia still wasn't back. Unsurprising. He doubted she'd bother coming home before morning, likely thinking he was asleep. That was fine by him. It gave him time to review the footage in private. In his study, behind a locked door, Aaron plugged the micro camera into his laptop. He braced himself and hit play. The video, though grainy in the low office light, clearly showed Julia entering Mark's office, greeting him with a kiss. Aaron's stomach clenched, but he forced himself to keep watching, memorizing every detail as if steeling his resolve. The two of them moved to the sofa. Voices were muffled but intelligible enough. Mark complaining about some crisis at work, likely the one Aaron caused, and Julia cooing in sympathy as she massaged his shoulders from behind. That export thing has me in knots, Mark sighed, running a hand through his hair. We had to halt everything today. God, what a nightmare! Julia murmured something soothing and suggested, "Come here, let me help you unwind." What followed made Aaron's face burn. Julia straddling Mark on the couch, their lips locked hungrily, clothes gradually discarded. Aaron stopped the playback there. He had seen enough. The camera had done its job. The remaining minutes would only inflict more pain to no useful end. He skipped forward just to verify he'd have a clear image of their indiscretion. A frame showed them half-dressed, Julia's face tilted back in passion. That was damning evidence if he ever saw it. He saved still shots of a few key moments, then closed the file. Shutting his laptop, Aaron exhaled shakily. The emotional impact of seeing his wife with another man, even expected, was devastating. He pressed the heels of his palms into his eyes, fighting off the urge to scream or sob or both. But in that tumult of emotions, one feeling reigned: grim satisfaction. He had them, both of them. Whatever love or loyalty that once was, Julia had shattered it, and now what replaced it was a drive for retribution. There would be no reconciliation, no tender forgiveness. Julia had made her choice, and so had he. Aaron spent the rest of the night on the couch, not sleeping but planning, replaying his scheme over and over, fine-tuning the next steps in his mind. The final act was approaching, and he would make sure every piece fell perfectly into place. The perfect setup. Exactly as Aaron had orchestrated, his warning landed at Apex Dynamics like a ghostly hand pulling an emergency brake. Early Friday morning, Apex's supply chain manager, Glenn Porter, opened the email from David Holloway and felt his blood run cold. Within an hour, a flurry of panicked meetings ensued at Apex's headquarters. By midday, production supervisors were instructed to halt all outgoing shipments of the MK6 gearboxes, pending a compliance review. Conveyor belts slowed to a stop, and puzzled line workers were sent on early breaks as managers huddled behind closed doors. From his office at Orion, Aaron monitored the situation with careful detachment. He got the first confirmation that his ruse was working when a colleague in Orion's sales department messaged him. "Hey, weird news. One of our clients says Apex delayed their gearbox delivery due to some legal issue. You hear anything?" Aaron allowed himself a tight-lipped smile at his screen. "Not sure, but I've got a feeling something's up," he replied innocently. Inside, he felt a dark thrill. The rival's supply chain was effectively paralyzed by nothing more than a well-crafted email and their own procedural caution. Meanwhile, at Apex Dynamics, Mark Bennett was having one of the worst days of his career. Late Friday morning, Mark barged into a conference room where Glenn, the legal counsel, and a few executives were gathered, examining printed copies of the mysterious warning. "Can someone explain to me why the hell we've stopped our MK6 line?" Mark snapped, barely keeping his frustration in check. Glenn cleared his throat, sliding the printout toward Mark. "We received this tip about a possible export control issue," he said. "It alleges that our MK6 gearboxes might violate U.S. export laws if shipped to certain countries. Something about the U.S.-made components exceeding the 10% threshold for sanctioned destinations." Mark scanned the email, his frown deepening. "Is this credible? Who is this Holloway?" The legal counsel, a stern woman with thin glasses, interjected. "We can't confirm Holloway's identity yet, but the regulations he cites are real. If there's even a chance it's true, we have to investigate. The penalties could be catastrophic if we blunder." Mark's jaw tightened. He knew she was right. The specter of multi-million-dollar fines or jail time for willfully violating export rules was not something he could ignore, especially not while being a VP of operations. "All right," he conceded gruffly. "Shut it down, temporarily, and get me answers. Contact the valve supplier in UOE and loop in Fairmont Company if needed. I want a full analysis of our U.S. content percentages and where every MK6 unit is going." Internally, Mark seethed at the timing. The board at Apex was already pressing him to deliver on ambitious sales targets, and now this phantom legal problem threatened to make him miss commitments. Across town at Orion, Aaron followed each development through indirect channels. By Friday afternoon, word had spread quietly among industry insiders that Apex had compliance issues. No public announcement was made, but supply chain gossip travels fast. Aaron even spotted a brief note on a trade forum. "Hearing that Apex Dynamics paused shipments due to export compliance check. Anyone know details?" He took a screenshot for posterity, feeling a vindication that was almost giddy. That evening, as he executed the other half of his plan, recording Mark and Julia's rendezvous, Aaron reflected on the elegant simplicity of it all. A single email, just words on a screen, had ensnared an entire division of his competitor. It was almost too easy, but he also knew Apex wouldn't stay frozen forever. By next week, they'd scour every document, call lawyers and suppliers, and likely conclude that the tip was either a false alarm or an honest mistake. They would eventually resume operations, perhaps in a few days. That was fine. Aaron didn't need them dead in the water permanently, just long enough to stumble at a critical moment. And stumble they did. Over the weekend, as Apex's MK6 assembly lines remained idle awaiting clearance, delays cascaded down their delivery schedule. Trucks that were supposed to carry finished gearboxes to automakers sat empty. Warehouses brimmed with unsent inventory. Customers down the line, car factories in Detroit, assembly plants in Europe, began to sound the alarm about late deliveries. On Monday morning, the CEO of Apex Dynamics convened an emergency conference call with his VPs. Mark was berated for not foreseeing this regulatory snag. Mark, in turn, threw everything at his compliance team, worked through the clock to verify if there was any truth to the tip. They even put in a call to a Commerce Department contact to ask hypotheticals, which yielded a non-committal caution. Nervously, Apex drafted an internal memo to its board, explaining that shipments were on hold out of an abundance of caution. Mark felt his career edges fraying. If this issue didn't resolve soon, he would be the one in the crosshairs. Aaron, of course, read that situation perfectly. In fact, he counted on it. Escalation and irony. While Apex floundered in bureaucratic quicksand of its own making, Orion Automotive and Aaron were ready to pounce. By Tuesday, reports of Apex's troubles had quietly reached some of Orion's key clients. One major automaker, Galaxy Motors, had a contract for Apex's MK6 gearboxes for its upcoming SUV line, and now those parts were delayed indefinitely. Galaxy's procurement managers urgently contacted Orion, their secondary supplier, in search of a stopgap. Orion's sales director called an impromptu meeting that morning. Aaron sat in, along with department heads, as the sales director relayed the plea. Galaxy Motors is in a bind. Apex can't deliver their transmissions this week due to, regulatory issues, I'm told. Galaxy is asking if we can fulfill an emergency order of 100 X90 gearboxes to keep their production running. He looked around the table, hopeful and anxious. Can we ramp up and deliver in under a week? It's a tall order. Aaron leaned forward. We can do it, he said confidently. All heads turned toward him. As chief engineer on the X90 line, he would know. Our inventory is healthy, and the production line has some unused capacity. I've run the numbers, he lied. In truth, he had quietly ensured over the weekend that Orion's plant was ready, pushing a rush on sourcing raw materials just in case. If we authorize overtime for the assembly team, we can assemble those 100 units in 5 days. His boss, the VP of engineering, raised an eyebrow. Are you sure, Aaron? We'd be reallocating resources from other projects. Aaron gave a tight smile. Galaxy is a strategic customer. If we help them now, they won't forget it. He didn't need to add, and Apex will deeply regret it. The CEO of Orion, who was dialed in on speakerphone, made the call. Do it. Whatever you need, overtime, expedited shipping, you have my go. Galaxy Motors is too important to let down. This is our chance to shine. By the end of the day, Orion had committed to the emergency order. Press releases weren't issued. It was all behind the scenes, but insiders knew what was happening. Orion quietly diverted shipments meant for its smaller clients to prioritize Galaxy's needs, with those clients understanding. They too relished seeing Apex embarrassed. In effect, Orion became the savior of the day for Galaxy, and Apex's failure was all the more glaring. Aaron oversaw the operation personally, working late at the Orion factory with a vigor that colleagues took as heroic dedication. You're a lifesaver, Aaron, the production manager told him as they coordinated the assembly line changes. If you hadn't anticipated this capacity crunch and prepped materials, we'd be scrambling. How'd you see it coming? Aaron just gave a modest shrug. I keep an ear to the ground, he said. Inside, he felt a swell of grim satisfaction. His reputation within Orion was rising sharply, a direct inverse of Mark's plummeting stature at Apex. What sweet symmetry. The irony wasn't lost on others either. By Wednesday, chatter in the industry hinted that Orion had stepped in as a white knight for Galaxy Motors. A rival stubbing its toe was one thing. Another competitor swooping in to capitalize was a harsher blow. Mark Bennett no doubt realized that each day Apex's lines were frozen, Orion was profiting, financially and reputationally, at their expense. In Apex's offices, backlog was piling up. Crates of completed MK6 gearboxes jammed their loading docks, awaiting a green light that was slow to come. The legal team was still combing through compliance documentation, and Glenn Porter had even flagged a question to the Bureau of Industry and Security, a move that might later look foolish, since there was no real violation. But until they got clarity, nothing moved. The CEO grew increasingly irritated, and the board had scheduled a special update for Friday. Mark felt a knot of dread. This debacle was landing squarely on his shoulders. To make matters worse for Mark, personal stress was mounting as well. On Thursday morning, he noticed something odd in his office. The framed photo of him and Julia that normally sat on his desk was different. Julia was missing from it. It was just him in the shot. Mark picked it up, perplexed. Had Julia removed it as some prank or sign? He couldn't ask her openly at work, but he sent her a text. "Did you take the photo from my office? The one of us?" Julia replied almost immediately. "What? No. Why would I do that?" A chill ran through Mark. If not her, then who? The cleaning crew? It made no sense. For the first time, he wondered if someone had been in his office without his knowledge. The idea unnerved him, but he had no proof or further leads. Julia, on her end, began to feel gnawing anxiety. Mark's question about the photo rattled her. Combined with Aaron's oddly calm demeanor lately, it made her suspect something was amiss. Had Aaron found out anything? She replayed recent days in her mind. He had been sweet, even attentive, no hint of anger. Surely if he knew, he would have confronted her, right? Julia tried to dismiss her worries. She chalked up Mark's missing photo to some office mix-up. But Aaron's silence was strategic. He was waiting for the final act, letting the tension build. In the span of a week, he had wrecked Mark's professional momentum and set himself up as an unsung hero at work. Apex's losses had become Orion's gains. Aaron's boss had even sent him an email praising his initiative. Outstanding foresight on the Galaxy situation. This kind of leadership doesn't go unnoticed. There was even talk of a promotion floating in the hallways. Aaron humbly deflected the accolades, but privately, he allowed himself one indulgence. Late at night, he'd look at himself in the mirror and feel, for once, a sense of justice being served. Still, he wasn't done. The grand finale was yet to come. Mark Bennett might survive the embarrassment of the supply snafu. These things could be chalked up to caution or bad luck. Given time, Apex would spin it away and patch up relations with clients, though not without cost. Aaron needed something irrevocable, something that would torpedo Mark's career permanently. And he had just the thing, waiting on a tiny memory card, the video evidence of Mark's affair with Julia. By Friday of the following week, Apex Dynamics finally lifted their self-imposed embargo. The compliance team concluded that the Holloway tip was baseless. No actual violation existed. Shipments resumed, and production ramped back up. But the damage was done. Apex's CEO was livid at the misjudgment that led to halting the line. In a board meeting that afternoon, he had to explain to directors why their quarterly numbers would take a hit and why a major client like Galaxy Motors was suddenly cozying up to Orion. According to whispers that later reached Aaron's ears, Mark Bennett's name was mentioned more than once in tones of severe disappointment. Mark himself knew his position was precarious. He spent that Friday evening in his office, nursing a glass of scotch alone. Julia had not come by today. In fact, they hadn't seen each other since their last encounter, as Mark was too consumed with damage control. Staring out at the dusk sky through his window, Mark replayed the week's events. One nagging thought plagued him. Was it just awful luck, or had someone engineered this nightmare? He thought of Orion's sudden readiness to pounce. How convenient it was for them. Could they have somehow planted the tip? Industrial espionage wasn't unheard of, but it usually didn't take such subtle forms. If Orion had a mole or an inside man? Mark shook his head. It seemed far-fetched. Yet the bitterness of being outplayed gnawed at him. That's when he saw a notification on his phone, a new email marked confidential. It was from an unfamiliar address, but the subject made his heart skip a beat. Know about your affair. Mark's pulse pounded as he opened it. There was no text, only a single attachment, an image file. With trembling fingers, he tapped it. A low-resolution photo popped up on the screen, grainy but unmistakable. It showed Mark and Julia on the sofa in his office, locked in an intimate embrace, both half undressed. Mark felt the blood drain from his face. He lunged to shut his office door, as if someone might see over his shoulder. A second email arrived seconds later from the same sender. "We need to talk. Tonight. For your own good." Below was an address, a small public park across town, and a time, 1 hour from now. Mark's hands shook. This was a blackmail setup, surely. But who? The first panicked thought, Julia's husband. Aaron. Did he send this? Mark had never met Aaron beyond a brief introduction long ago. He barely remembered his face. But who else could it be? Who would have that photo? Suddenly, the oddities, the photo frame, the consultant email, slammed together in Mark's mind like puzzle pieces. Aaron Ryder. The quiet engineer Mark had derided as too busy to notice. He had noticed, all right. And he had orchestrated everything. It was horrifying and impressive in a way that made Mark sick to his stomach. He tried calling Julia, but she didn't answer, likely busy at home. Mark didn't leave a voicemail. What could he say? Instead, he composed himself and decided he had no choice. He had to meet this person, likely Aaron, and beg or bargain his way out. If that picture got out to the Apex board, his career was finished. Apex had a strict ethics code. Executives having affairs, especially ones that could expose them to blackmail, were often forced to resign to protect the company's integrity. He remembered vividly the case of a Boeing CEO fired for an affair, the board citing it as impaired judgment and leadership. Mark could lose everything, his job, reputation, maybe even any severance or reference, in one fell swoop. Dusk settled over the quiet park as Mark arrived, scanning nervously for whoever had contacted him. Aaron stepped out from behind a cluster of trees, face partially lit by a distant street lamp. Mark recognized him now, the same man he'd cuckolded, standing there with an unreadable expression. In Aaron's hand was a small manila envelope. Mark approached, sweating despite the cool evening breeze. "Aaron, Aaron's voice was low and steady. "Mr. Bennett, thank you for coming. I think we both know what this is about." He held up the envelope and slipped out a series of photo prints, fanning them briefly. Even in dim light, Mark could see they were stills from the video-damning snapshots of his indiscretion. Aaron's face hardened. "I have a video as well. High-definition audio included. Quite vivid." For a split second, Mark's shock flared into anger. He took a half step forward, face contorting. "So it was you," he snarled, voice shaking. "You think you can blackmail me and get away with this? You set me up, you little—" But the insult died on his tongue, and his bravado crumbled almost as quickly as it had arisen. Mark's eyes dropped back to the photos in his trembling hand, the reality of his position sinking in. He had no leverage. He was caught, and he knew it. Mark's brief bravado collapsed into desperation. He raised his hands in a placating gesture, his fury melting to a pitiful plea. This powerful executive, who'd once been so cocksure, was now ashen-faced and cringing. "Please, Aaron, I'm sorry." The words spilled out in a desperate rush. "I'm sorry about Julia. It just happened. I never meant to hurt you. This week, all these problems, if that was you, I understand why. But please, don't do anything rash with that video. It would ruin me." Aaron watched him coldly, saying nothing. The silence pressed on until Mark continued, stumbling over his pleas. "Look, I'll resign from Apex if that's what you want. I'll end it with Julia immediately. You'll never hear from either of us again. Just, I beg you, don't send that to my board or my family." Mark's voice cracked. He was nearly choking on panic. "I can't undo what I did, but I can try to make amends. I could quietly leave the company, cite health reasons. Maybe you could even take my place. I know Orion would love a shot at someone with my connections. I could put in a word." He was rambling nonsense now, grasping at any straw. Aaron finally spoke, each word measured and dripping with contempt. You think I called you here to negotiate? He stepped closer, and Mark flinched as if expecting a blow. But Aaron's vengeance had already transcended physical violence. No, Mark. I didn't orchestrate all of this just to let you slink away on your terms. This isn't a bargaining table. It's a sentencing. Mark's eyes widened. Please, he whispered, a single word laced with fear. Aaron felt a strange calm as he looked at the pathetic figure before him. In this moment, he realized he didn't even feel anger so much as a grim fulfillment. You took my wife, Mark. You smiled in my face and then went behind my back, all while thinking I was too insignificant to matter. You made a mockery of my marriage and thought there'd be no consequences. Aaron's voice remained eerily calm, but it gained an edge of steel. Well, you were wrong. Actions have consequences. You're about to face yours. With that, Aaron turned the envelope of photos over and let them scatter at Mark's feet like fallen leaves. Mark bent to pick one up reflexively, a shot of him kissing Julia fervently on that office couch. He looked up, mouth opening to protest or beg further, but Aaron was already walking away into the gloom, disappearing into the darkness beneath the trees. As Mark crumpled in the park, Aaron walked back to his car parked discreetly down the block. His heart was thudding, adrenaline from the confrontation coursing through him. But he wasn't done yet. He sat in the driver's seat, took a moment to steady his breathing, and pulled out a tablet from the glove compartment. Using his phone's hotspot, he composed one last set of messages in the cool darkness of his car. This had to be precise and irrevocable. By now, Aaron had obtained the email contacts of Apex's board members, 12 in all, through a combination of public records and a bit of online sleuthing. On the tablet screen, he drafted a brief cover note to accompany the damning video. His wording was formal, anonymous, and crafted to hit the board's sensitivities. To the Board of Directors of Apex Dynamics, it is my duty to inform you of a serious ethical lapse by one of your executives, Vice President Mark Bennett. Enclosed is video evidence of Mr. Bennett engaged in an illicit affair, recorded on company premises. The affair involves the spouse of an employee at a rival firm, creating a clear vulnerability for blackmail and a breach of Apex's code of conduct. This behavior represents not only personal moral failure, but a liability for the company's integrity and reputation. I urge the board to take immediate action, consistent with Apex Dynamics' commitment to ethical leadership. Aaron double-checked the attachment, a compressed, trimmed segment of the video that left no doubt about the participants and the list of recipients. His finger hovered for a moment. He thought of people like Mark, who coasted through life thinking the rules didn't apply to them. He thought of Julia's deceit and the pain it caused. Then he pressed send. There was no triumphal music, no fanfare, just the soft whoosh of the email leaving the outbox, carrying with it the final blow. That night, every member of Apex Dynamics' board of directors received an anonymous email. The sender claimed to be a whistleblower concerned with ethical conduct in leadership. Attached was a video file containing explicit footage of Vice President Mark Bennett engaged in an extramarital affair, time-stamped within Apex's own office. The accompanying message stated that the woman in the video was the wife of an engineer at a competing firm, thus exposing Mr. Bennett, and by extension Apex, to potential scandal and blackmail. It concluded with a single line. Leadership is judged not only by results, but by integrity. Epilogue. The fallout was swift and devastating for those who had wronged Aaron. By Monday morning, Mark Bennett was terminated from Apex Dynamics, the decision made in an emergency board meeting over the weekend. Officially, Apex released a terse statement that Mr. Bennett had resigned to attend to personal matters. But industry insiders knew the truth. As expected, the Apex board took no chances with a scandal that could tarnish the company's reputation. Mark's fall from grace was swift and total. Beyond the loss of his position, he became effectively untouchable in the industry. No company was eager to welcome an executive mired in such scandal. In hushed conversations, his story became a cautionary tale about how personal misconduct could topple even the most successful career. News of his abrupt fall from grace circulated through hushed conversations. At Orion's office that day, Aaron overheard a few colleagues murmuring by the coffee machine. "Did you hear Bennett at Apex quit? Something about a personal scandal," one said. "I'm not surprised," another replied. "There were rumors about misconduct." Aaron kept his face impassive as he stirred his own coffee, offering only a casual, "Corporate dramas, huh?" before walking away. He felt no pity for Mark, only a cool sense of satisfaction that justice had been served. Mark, once a rising star, found himself effectively blacklisted. No serious company would touch an executive with his baggage. In the whisper networks of the corporate world, his name became a quiet cautionary tale, a footnote on how personal misconduct can topple even the mighty. Within Orion, Aaron Ryder's star rose high. His handling of the crisis, as they saw it, earned him an early promotion to head of product engineering, a position that had been competitive to attain. Colleagues congratulated him, unaware of the full saga behind his good instincts. Aaron accepted the new role with a humble smile, keeping his deeper satisfaction to himself. And what of Julia? Her world crumbled in a more intimate, private way. The day after the video was sent, Aaron finally confronted her at home. At dinner that evening, Aaron's tone was icily formal. "We need to talk, Julia." He placed his phone on the table, the screen showing her incriminating emails. Julia's face blanched. "Whoa, what is this?" she faltered, trying to muster a laugh that fell flat. "Why are you going through my emails?" Aaron's eyes bore into hers. "Stop," he said quietly. "No more lies. I know everything." Julia's composure shattered. I mean, it's not what it looks like," she stammered, tears already welling. But Aaron tapped his phone, bringing up a still frame from the video of her and Mark entangled on the office sofa. He turned it to face her. Julia's hand flew to her mouth as she burst into sobs. Apologies tumbled out. "I'm sorry, Aaron. I never meant to. It just happened. I was going to end it, I swear." She reached for his arm, but he pulled away, his expression stony. There was nothing she could say that he hadn't already heard or expected. Aaron's voice never rose. It didn't need to. When she finally fell silent, trembling and weeping, he spoke with terrible calm. "It's over, Julia. Our marriage, everything. You destroyed it." There was a finality in his tone that cut through her sobs like a blade. Julia begged for forgiveness, for another chance, but Aaron only shook his head. "No, we're done." She moved out that week to stay with a friend. Aaron watched in silence as she packed a suitcase and some boxes of personal items, her face etched with regret and grief. She left her keys on the kitchen counter and softly said goodbye through tears. Aaron offered no reply, only closing the door behind her, a quiet final punctuation on their life together. The divorce papers arrived soon after. Aaron allowed her no comfort beyond the minimum courtesy. He was civil, but utterly resolved. There was no dramatic fury in those final exchanges, only the clear finality of a door shut forever. Julia would later come to realize that the man she betrayed had enacted a form of justice that spared her physically but left her living with the consequences nonetheless: a wrecked marriage, a lover disgraced, and the cold realization that her own choices had led here. In the weeks that followed, industry gossip gradually moved on to other matters. Apex Dynamics quietly cleaned house, bringing in new management and reiterating ethical codes to its staff. Orion Automotive enjoyed the boost in business and reputation. Few knew the full story of what had transpired behind the scenes, how one engineer's revenge had played out not with violence or crime, but through shrewd maneuvering and information warfare. On a crisp morning a month after it all, Aaron Ryder stood outside what used to be his home, now half empty as Julia's things had been removed. The divorce was nearly finalized. Soon, he would sell the house and start fresh elsewhere. He sipped a cup of coffee and gazed at the rising sun. There was a heaviness in his heart. The pain of betrayal doesn't vanish quickly. But there was also a sense of grim contentment. In a world where betrayals often go unpunished, he had made sure this one did not. Aaron finished his coffee and headed to his car. A new day of work ahead. At Orion, he was respected, even seen as a hero by some, for his role in turning around that supply crisis. None of his coworkers would ever know the full extent of the storm he navigated and ultimately controlled. As he drove towards the office, Aaron allowed himself one last look in the rearview mirror at the life he was leaving behind. Then he smiled faintly and looked forward down the road. He knew he would carry the scars of this ordeal for a long time. But those scars were also a testament to his resilience. He had been betrayed and broken, yet he had reclaimed control of his life on his own terms. In the quiet aftermath, he understood the truth of what he had done. He had won. Not with fists or fury, but with cold strategy and patience. The people who tried to ruin him had instead ruined themselves. And in that victory, however bittersweet, Aaron found closure. He had proven that sometimes the most potent weapon isn't a gun or a fist, but information and the resolve to use it.